Hello there, faithful listener. You've tuned in to Season 7 of the Bible Explained podcast. So make sure to grab your cup of coffee, because today we are going to be discussing the book of 2 Samuel. Good morning, friends and faithful listeners. Welcome to the Bible Explained podcast. And you know what? I had something so amazing happen to me last week. Somebody purchased a computer for P40 Ministries, and that is just such a godsend. My current computer just does not do a lot of the things that I need it to do. It doesn't have a very good CPU, and so I can't do video editing on this computer, unfortunately. It just tends to crash or blue screen, and recently it's gotten so bad that when I open up my video editor software, it will crash or freeze my computer 2 or 3 times while I'm working on it, and I'll have to restart it. And so I'm saving my project every 30 seconds because of how annoying it has been recently. So this was a godsend, and I just want to thank the person who donated the computer to P40 Ministries. Thank you very much, and I'm very, very excited to get it. Today we're going to be in 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 15. This is talking about Absalom trying to usurp the throne from his father. We're going to talk about how it is not good to try to please other people, because people pleasing is just trouble, because people are fickle. So let's go ahead and read this. As always, I'll be reading from the WEB version of the Bible. Feel free to grab the version of the Bible that you prefer. Once again, this is 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 15. After this, Absalom prepared a chariot and horses for himself and 50 men to run before him. Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. When any man had a suit which should come to the king for judgment, then Absalom called to him and said, "What city are you from?" He said, "Your servant is one of the tribes of Israel." Absalom said to him, "Behold, your matters are good and right, but there is no man deputized by the king to hear you." Absalom said moreover, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man who has any suit or cause might come to me, and I would do him justice." It was so that when any man came near to bow down to him, he stretched out his hand and took hold of him and kissed him. Absalom did this sort of thing to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. At the end of 40 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to Yahweh in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I was staying in Geshur in Syria, saying, 'If Yahweh shall indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve Yahweh.' The king said to him, 'Go in peace.' So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom is king in Hebron.' 200 men went with Absalom out of Jerusalem. 200 men went with Absalom out of Jerusalem, who were invited, and went in their simplicity, and they didn't know anything. Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he was offering the sacrifices. The conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. A messenger came to David, saying, 'The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom.' David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, 'Arise, let's flee, or else none of us will escape from Absalom. Hurry to depart, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down evil on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword.' The king's servants said to the king, 'Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king chooses.'" On Friday, we talked about how David just did not discipline his children. Absalom needed disciplining a long, long time ago, and David just did not do it. In fact, David didn't discipline any of his kids, because all of this is now beginning to spiral out of control. Absalom is getting worse and worse and worse, as we can see throughout these chapters. So the start of everything was when Amnon, David's firstborn son, raped his half-sister Tamar. And Tamar happened to be the full sister of Absalom. And so Absalom, when he found out about his sister Tamar getting raped by their brother, he was so angry and he hated Amnon because of it. And David did nothing about the situation. When he found out his son had raped his daughter, he literally did nothing. He didn't even say anything to Amnon. It just says that he was angry, but he didn't discipline his kids in any way for that. Absalom ended up killing Amnon because of it. And so Absalom was probably thinking, you know what? If my dad's not going to take care of the situation, then I'm going to take care of it. So Absalom made himself the judge in that situation, and he was wrong, and he committed murder and ran away. And once again, David did nothing about it. He just let the problem fester for years, actually, until he brought Absalom home. And then he let the problem fester even more because Absalom was back home, and yet David still did not punish him for what he had done. And so now Absalom is beginning to get more and more and more prideful because of David's lack of discipline and because Absalom was an evil man. I mean, just because David didn't know how to discipline, that doesn't mean that Absalom was in the right in any way. Absalom was an evil person, and we're going to find out why today. It says that after this, meaning after Absalom came home and was once again in good graces with King David, Absalom prepared a chariot and horses for himself and 50 men to run before him. If you guys remember what we briefly talked about on Friday, Absalom was a very good-looking man. In fact, he was one of the best-looking men in Israel, is what it said. He was perfect from head to foot, and he had really gorgeous long locks of hair, and his hair was thick and heavy also. And he was just a good-looking guy. And I'm sure that that was a sense of pride for him. And it's helping him, as well, as we're going to talk about today. So Absalom prepares this chariot and these horses for himself and 50 men to run before him. So what Absalom's doing here is he's making himself as flamboyant as possible to the people. He's preparing a chariot, which chariots back in these days were very hard to come by, along with all of these horses to pull this chariot, and then all of these men to run before him, to walk and maybe hold signs or announce that Absalom is coming. So Absalom is putting on this big flamboyant show with all of this pomp for the people of Israel to make himself very well known. Because obviously if somebody is, traipsing around the countryside in the most fashionable way possible, people are going to take notice of that. He's already well known because he's good looking, but now he's got to make a show out of it. Then Absalom rises up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And this is not just one time. Scripture is implying that he did this on a regular basis. He would wake up very early before everybody else was up, and he would go into the city with his chariots and with his 50 men, and he would stand by the gates of the city and just greet people as they walked into the city. He's the king's son. He's handsome. He's got this chariot and all these horses, and he's greeting people as they come into the city. And I'm sure people were excited to see him. They're like, oh man, that's the king's son. They want to take a picture with him if they had pictures back in those days. So Absalom is greeting all these people. And it says that when any man had a suit, meaning a lawsuit, which should come to the king for judgment, then Absalom called to him and said, what city are you from? So he's specifically targeting certain individuals. So he's probably greeting everybody, but if he finds out that somebody has a lawsuit, somebody has a problem that they're trying to bring to the king, he would take special interest in those particular people. And he'd be like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. What's your problem? Like, what city are you from? I'm so sorry to hear all this. And he would be charming these people. And the person would be like, oh, I'm from such and such city. And they'd probably be so excited that they're meeting the king's son and he's taking a special interest in them, right? I mean, who wouldn't? So Absalom says to them, your matters are good and right, but there is no man deputized by the king to hear you. So he plants this little seed of discourse within this person. He's like, you know what? Your problem is just. Your matters are right. You deserve to be heard by the king, but unfortunately the king is just so busy and there's nobody to hear you right now. And of course these people would be infuriated, right? Because they're like, well, I traveled all the way to this city. What do you mean I can't be heard by the king? What do you mean my problem isn't big enough for the king? Like, why can't I be seen by the king? So people would get angry. And then Absalom would say to them, "Oh, that I were a judge in the land, that every man who has a suit or a cause might come to me, and I would do him justice." So then Absalom would be like, "You know what? You're absolutely right. This is terrible. It's because, the king is so busy. If only I were judge in the land, I would make this right. I would do justice for you." And remember how I said on Friday that Absalom was beginning to think of himself as a better judge than King David. He was thinking that he was absolutely in the right for killing his brother Amnon. He was thinking that he could handle problems better than David because David didn't do anything within his own family. But the thing about King David is, even though he was not a family man, he was a terrible family man, even though he did not focus on the matters within his own family, he was a fantastic judge and king. He was very worried about his people and the problems of his people. So David was a great king, but Absalom was like, "You know what? I'd be an even better king." And so he's planting discourse. He's sowing discourse, right? To all of these people in Israel that are coming to the king to try to get their cases heard. Absalom did this sort of thing to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So this means that day after day, Absalom was working at his goal of usurping the throne from King David. Absalom was third in line for the throne. The first was Amnon, who Absalom killed. The second was this guy named Chileab, which we don't know much about. He was actually the next in line for the throne. So either Chileab had died, and so that's why nobody hears of him anymore, or Chileab was just a quieter kid, and just nothing ended up being written about him because he never really did anything. So Absalom was third in line for the throne, but he thought of himself as better for the throne than anybody else, even better than King David. He was an extremely prideful and entitled person. So Absalom is working day after day. I mean, for all of the faults that Absalom has, laziness does not seem to be one of them. Absalom was working day after day to try to usurp the throne from his father, and this was how he was doing it. He was getting up early, he was putting on his best clothes, he was making himself, friendly with all of these people coming into the city, and he was sowing discourse. And here's the other thing that he was doing. It says that when any man came near to bow down to him, he stretched out his hand, took hold of him, and kissed him. So he was pretending to be humble, right? Even though he was a very arrogant jerk. He was pretending to be humble, pretending to be like, one of the people, even though he's dressed to the nines and got this chariot with him. And, people are so nearsighted, they can't see stuff like that. They just see Absalom looking handsome, standing at the gate of the city, talking to everybody, shaking hands, kissing people. And so it says here that Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. People are so nearsighted sometimes that they can't see the whole picture. They can't see what Absalom really was. He was an arrogant person trying to take the throne away from his father. And unfortunately, Israel bought it. Israel was like, "You know what? We love Absalom. This is who we want as our new king." People like other people who are famous, who are rich, who are attractive and good looking, and who are charming. That is what people like. And so the Israelites, their hearts are being stolen away because they were fickle and they couldn't see that there was a problem here. So it says at the end of 40 years, Absalom's 40th birthday, it says, Absalom says to the king, "Please let me go and pay a vow which I have vowed to Yahweh in Hebron." So this is another thing that Absalom was doing. I mean, man, he was a charming guy and he was a deceiver. He really knew how to look good to everybody who was around him. So to the Israelites, he's looking good by being friendly and charming. To King David, he's looking good by pretending he is religious. He says, "I'm going to go pay a vow to Yahweh because I said to Yahweh, if Yahweh will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve Yahweh." And of course, David hears this and he's like, oh, good. Absalom is finally starting to serve Yahweh. This is great. And so the king says to Absalom, go in peace. So Absalom goes. He went to Hebron. But Absalom, instead of fulfilling this vow that he pretended to take that he never took, it says instead, he sent spies throughout all of the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom is king in Hebron. And this is just the second part of Absalom's plan to get people to make him the king. He's sending out these spies to pretend like they are messengers, right? And they're going to tell the people, oh, the people made Absalom the king over in Hebron. And that was the point of these spies, is to spread the lie that Absalom has been made king in Hebron. So Absalom is just putting together, scheming to make this plan go into motion, right? It says that 200 men went with Absalom out of Jerusalem, who were invited, and they went in their simplicity. They didn't know anything. So Absalom takes these 200 men who he invited to go with him, and none of these men know a single thing of what Absalom is planning. They have no understanding of what's going on. They're just like, oh, Absalom invited me to go with him to Hebron, so I guess we're going to go. And what was the point of this? Well, this was a way for Absalom to look like he had followers. 200 people going with him looking like they are supporting him. 200 men from Jerusalem, from King David's own city, looking like they are going to make Absalom the next king. But of course, none of these men know anything. Absalom is just devising this whole thing in his head to make sure he gets the throne. So it says that Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city, even from Gilo, when he was offering the sacrifices. So Ahithophel was one of David's top advisors, actually, a top counselor. And somehow Absalom convinced him even to go along. And as of this moment, I don't know if Ahithophel knew what Absalom was planning or not, but he will be in the story more in the future as well. And it says that this conspiracy was strong. It was growing even stronger because the people are seeing Absalom with all of these followers and with Ahithophel, one of David's top advisors, and they're hearing these spies that are pretending to be messengers, and they're thinking that Absalom is the next king. And so this conspiracy is growing so strong that it actually looks like Absalom is going to win here. It actually looks like Absalom will be the next king. And David ends up hearing about it. That is how strong this conspiracy got. It says a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. So David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let's flee, or else none of us will escape from Absalom. This is the second time now that David fully knew and believed how bad Absalom really was. The first time was in the last chapter, when a bunch of messengers came to David and were like, Absalom just killed all of your sons. And David believed it, even though that actually wasn't the truth. Absalom had only killed Amnon, but somehow word had spread that Absalom killed all of David's sons. And David didn't even question it. He's like, yes, he certainly did. And he like tore his garments and fell down on his face, like in deep mourning, right? Because he truly believed that Absalom had actually killed all of his children. David now, once again, when he hears that Absalom is trying to make himself king, he believes it. He doesn't even question it. He's like, yes, Absalom is truly evil. David knew how Absalom was. And so this is what just makes me question David. It just makes me question, like, why didn't he do anything about Absalom? If David knew how bad Absalom really was, shouldn't he have tried to stop it? And so that is what is so confusing to me about David. Maybe he was just, too kind or something, because he was kind. So maybe he was just a very kind person. He was kind of like a doormat sometimes. I don't know. That's kind of what I guess about David, is he just had a kinder side to him maybe. But then we see him, chapters ago being a ruthless warrior at times. And so that's what makes me wonder about David. He kind of seems to flip-flop back and forth from overly kind to like a warrior. I don't know. David kind of confuses me sometimes, if I'm being honest, but he was a very soft father and just had trouble disciplining his own kids. So David decides to flee with all of his servants, and his servants agree to go with him. So there's still a strong group of people who are on the side of King David. And you might wonder, why did the Israelites change sides so quickly when David was such a good king? Well, because once again, people are so fickle. I mean, look at the New Testament. Look at the story of Jesus. When a week before Jesus was crucified, he was being praised in the city, and basically everybody was trying to make him their king. And then just a week later, they all turned on him. They all fled. They all said, "Crucify him." That is how fickle people can be, which is why we shouldn't care so much about what people think of us, because people will change their minds about us for the dumbest little reasons, right? We shouldn't care so much about that. We should be caring about what God thinks of us, because God is the one who decides what is truly going to happen. Because as we're going to find out, even though it looks like Absalom is winning here, by all human measures, it's God who decides who the next king is going to be. And that is true for every area of our lives. It might look like evil people are winning now, but that is not always going to be the case. It is God who decides the outcome of everything. So we should be looking for approval from God and not approval from other people. Scripture is filled with stories like this, filled with stories about how we shouldn't be trying to please other people because it's never going to work out the way we think. Just like Absalom here, he's trying to please all of the Israelites. Spoiler alert, it's not going to work out the way he thinks it will, and even the way other people think that it will. And this is just one of many stories that are very similar to that. We need to be caring about what God thinks of us. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that it was an encouragement to you. I will see you guys all on the next episode. Happy listening, and God bless.